The rest of the night will be moderated by Jessica. And Jessica Hoppe is a Honduran Ecuadorian writer based in New York City. She's been featured on ABC News and HBO Max Balante, and her work has appeared in the Latino Book Review, the New York Times, Vogue, Paper Magazine, and more. Jessica is a board member of Time of Butterflies, a nonprofit supporting families through domestic abuse recovery, and an organizer with the Central American Writers Group. First in the Family is available now as her first memoir. And Star of the Night, Lilliam Rivera is a MacDowell Fellow and an award-winning author of 8 works of fiction, 4 young adult novels, 3 middle grade books, and a graphic novel for DC Comics. Her books have been awarded a Pura Belpre honor and featured on NPR and The New Yorker and LA Times, etc., etc. Many, many best of lists. And the novel Never Look Back is slated for a movie adaptation. Amazing. And Lilliam Lilliam is a Bronx, New York native, but currently lives in Los Angeles. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for having me. First
Thank
of all,
you for
I
asking
love
me.
that this place is here. I mean,
Yeah.
I walked in with my sister and we were just like, we're going to be here forever. Like it's just browsing through the shelves. It's just such a treasure, like just having this space here. So I'm really glad that we're having this here, and I'm really happy that
Yeah.
you're here
Thank
to
you
have
so
this
much.
conversation. Because as soon as I read your memoir, I was like, oh, this is a conversation that we could have.
Yeah, absolutely. We could talk forever. Yes, I am so privileged to be here. I loved your book, obviously. I read it the moment I got the ARC, and then I reread it and I listened to it, which was a great experience.
Oh, I haven't done that. I'm kind of scared to listen to it.
No, it's really exciting. And it's just like a fun, it's just like a fun experience. And it also helps me because I'm dyslexic. So like reading and listening together, I'm like, ooh, okay, this is fully immersive. Also, as a former fashion girly, it's just what I've been waiting for all my life, to have something that, I don't know, I think that fashion is perceived as being very frivolous, even though it's something that we all think about. And it's one of the first and accessible forms of self-expression. And for me, it was always really important. And I think it got me in a bit of trouble when I was young. Or to be a Latina and to be a brown woman in a predominantly white space, what I put on my body was very much, it was just paid attention to, and then obviously had a particular expression, I guess, or interpretation, let's say. Or my expression was not the interpretation. They were conflict. So I think that you should, have you been reading at your...
Yeah, I could read a little snippet.
Why don't
here.
you read
Okay.
for us? Don't you, we all want to hear some? Yes.
Okay, so this is just a quick thing that the book is about Samara, who's a Cuban Jersey girl who ends up moving to Vernon, California for this job at with a legendary fashion designer. And when she gets there, she's leaving her family, leaving Jersey with a heavy heart, grieving, but also with like dark secrets as well. And she gets this job, and the job is stressful, and so her drinking increases, and so do visions that she sees increase as the story goes along, and you're not sure what's real. So what I wanted to read is just in the beginning, and she's just walking home from work. Okay. Her Prada loafers don't make much noise, and she likes the way her A-line Mota skirt switches against her legs in a sensual manner. Dressing up for work is something she enjoys. If she's not getting approval from Antonio or from her co-workers, then she's failed at amping up her fashion. Her appearances are daily assessments she has to pass. Only a couple of long avenues left to make it to the Murphy. She thinks about the money she's saving by walking and what a good environmental citizen she is, while also glancing at her phone to heart items on Net-a-Porter that she has her eye on purchasing.
I was just doing that.
There are still so called you out. There's still so many things she needs for the apartment. As of late, she's been paying attention to emerging artists, asking Antonio who he loves and why. She wants to purchase her first art piece soon and then invite people over so they can stare at it, adding gallery girl to her growing resume. As she rounds a corner, her eyes catches a glint of light twinkling. She can't quite make the object out at first, but soon it comes into focus. A long silver meat hook hangs off a telephone wire. Dangling from the hook is an empty wooden fruit crate. The box sways back and forth, creating an eerie sound like an out-of-tune guitar string. The hook is so severe, strangely new, not rusty in any way. In contrast, the wooden crate is old and stained. The label on the crate is barely legible, with a faded illustration of a woman with short, tight curls wearing a type of caricatured Mexican folklore costume with bells dangling from the sleeves. Her cleavage heaves forward, but it's her face that has Samara transfixed. A garish green color covers her cheeks, causing the face to appear ghoulish, dead. The crate keeps swaying, then a whimpering sound emerges from a nearby bush. The bush trembles and the noise becomes louder. The hook moves faster, the movement more severe. The crate now rocks back and forth. What the hell? Samara asks, wondering if another possum is hidden in the bush waiting to jump out. Like a fool, she doesn't move, even when the rocking becomes more violent. The pungent stink from the slaughterhouse reaches her nostrils and her knees go weak. Samara tries to shield herself from the stench by covering her mouth and nose. The vernon perfume hasn't been bothering her too greatly. She's usually able to avoid it. There's something of a timetable to when it drenches the air, and she tries to follow the schedule. But this is the first time Samara is being polluted with it on her walk home. The scent is so thick and moist, like nothing she's ever encountered before, and she's taken the subway during New York heat waves. There's no wind, and yet the smell is so powerful. The whimpering grows louder, more precise. Something is coming. Samara digs in her purse and takes out Abuela's scissors. The tremor in her hands causes the metal to catch the light of the moon, and it gleams just like the swinging hook. Samara doesn't understand how the crate continues to sway or what's jostling the bush. I'll just end there. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. That is perfect for my first question.
Wait, are you not going to read a little something?
Okay, yes. Your publicist told me that, and I was like, no. But I do have something in honor of Samara.
Yeah, I really will love that.
I will read for her really quickly. Reliable narrator. Okay. I don't even know where it is. I should have marked it. I'm so sorry. 1 second.
I should have reminded you.
Right? No. I just felt like we can forget that. But let me ask you a question first, because I feel like it's perfect after what you read. Because for me, obviously, I just wrote my very first book. I write nonfiction, and horror just seems so like, I'm like, I could never do that. And what I found in my experience was it was really, I realized how disembodied I had been, you know, and so when you're trying to create these worlds, right, these really immersive worlds, you think of the 5 senses, and one of the senses I find so difficult is smell. And so a lot of the focus in Tiny Threads is the sense of smell, and focusing on this terrible smell, this really pungent smell, right, this noxious smell of the factories, and we can understand that. But you also have these really beautiful lines, like my favorite was the introduction. I loved that moment. I loved that story. You write about the tobacco and sweat. So it's always like this dance between the sweetness and musk, the sweetness of the sprigs of lavender he carries in his pocket like a secret. The perfume of smoke and lavender, the fragrance replaces the strawberries that once stained her fingers. So I felt very lulled by that, but knowing it's horror, I was like bracing. But I also wanted to ask you, why is texture so important in your world building, and how did you use it to create such an immersive environment, and particularly how that relates to writing horror?
Thanks for the question. Thanks for reading. I do like that first start, the prologue. Everyone hates prologues, but I liked writing it.
Right.
I think with horror, because a lot of, we watch a lot of movies, or I watch a lot of horror movies, everything's just sort of presented to you and you're swayed a lot with the sound, with soundtracks. And you don't have that unless you listen to the audiobook maybe. But I really wanted to pay attention to Vernon, and Vernon being that it's a real place outside of Los Angeles, and it's a place that only has a population of 200 people, and it's only factories. It's all factories. And so it used to be an idyllic place, an idyllic home that you wanted to set up shop, I guess. But eventually it has a history of corruption. It's a strange history and very dark and disturbing. And so it was a perfect place to set a horror book in, but it's also like it lives, right? And so the Vernon, there used to be a Farmer John's, which is a slaughterhouse. It's no longer there, but that did exist for many, many decades. For decades, the place Vernon is known for polluting the area. Has a history of polluting the area neighborhoods like East LA, Maywood. So it has a history of smells and the soil itself. So the violence lives in the soil, and it's continuously being fed to the mostly brown communities, through the water, through everything. So that's the reality. So I don't really have to amp up much, if you think of it face value. But for the horror, I just always thought of smells and how a smell can evoke such memory for anyone. And that could just be the smell of lavender, but it could also be the smell of death. And so I really wanted to make sure that I had that going.
I was imagining you like surrounded by candles and different scents and Palo Santo or something like.
I mean, I had the candle going also just because it's dark stuff that you're writing. And I know that you've, even writing your memoir, you're dealing with stuff that embodies you. And memories, right? And so that it was hard for me to write this book, but it's also, I did try to keep candles and nice things, flowers.
Keep the abuelos close. Exactly. I love this moment here. So for me, Antonio is really giving like Oscar de la Renta, right?
Scandal,
right? Like all the like Hispanicizing and like the emphasis on the Spanish roots,
right?
And then Samara seems like very judgmental of that, like rightly so, right? But she also seems kind of blind to the idea, at least how I see it, that her like girl bossing and her achievement obsessions are sort of like two sides of the same coin.
Right.
Is that my interpretation, or do you see them as mirrors?
Yes. I mean, it's funny. I didn't think of Oscar de la Renta at all, but I wasn't thinking of anyone particular.
In particular. Yeah.
I felt like it was just a combination of
a lot of them.
Right? And so, but she's, ambition is a poison. And so she really wants to strive, or, she really wants to thrive in this position, and she'll do whatever it takes to do that, which is like overlooking Antonio's, flaws and stuff. There's things about Antonio Mota, who's a designer, who I loved. The whole, like, I understood him and his desire to still be relevant in an industry that maybe as you age out, that people don't think you're relevant anymore. Right. And so there was something really sad about that, and being surrounded by young people all the time. It just felt very like I can understand him, but she overlooking it is just, you overlook a lot of stuff when you take a job.
I love when you wrote, this is what she wanted for herself, to be as close to a true artist like Mota as possible, so that their spotlight will spill onto her too. She's ready to let go of her grief and be radiant in this new chapter of her life, where no one knows her history, only the story she chooses to tell. So we can relate to that. I can relate to that.
Yeah. Like I just remember jobs that I would take and I would deny that I had kids. I would did not, you know, just because I knew that's not going to look good. They need me to cover events. You know, I was whatever, an entertainment editor or whatever. And so I couldn't say that I had kids. That's not cute. You can't, you know. And so it was just all this thing of like, how much more can I sell of myself?
The performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, we still do it. There are moments when I still do it. Maybe it's age that I don't change as much, but I find myself like going back to that. I mean, you know, sometimes.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's it's just like, I don't think you're ever cured of it. It's like, it's about how quickly you can interrupt it. You know what I mean? It's like how quickly you can be like, ooh, I'm believing that story about myself. Like, let me get like grounded here for a moment. But that's perfect because it goes into my next question, which again is about Samara, which obviously I identified with her a lot. Like, I hated her. I loved her. I was like, don't do it. Yeah. But so she has a secret and she's desperate for reinvention, but she's spinning, right? She can't kind of seem to get the grip under her feet. And I'm in recovery. I'm in recovery for 8 years. And so I obviously was I was relating to her, you know, the self-medicating and that idea or that feeling of betrayal, you know, the feeling that occurs when you're reaching for the thing that's meant to help. And then you have that moment of realization where you're like, oh God, this is harming me. Like, this is the thing that's harming, but I need this. So it was really, for me, it was so poignant, but how important was it for you to use the drinking sort of to illustrate that this is a symptom of this toxic, dysfunctional environment, and the way that I'm trying to cope is actually plunging me to the bottom? Could you tell me more about how important it was for you to talk about the drinking and use that as that?
Yeah. You know, it's like you, I've been sober for many years, and I feel like a lot of my writing talks about addiction and alcoholism, even in young adult books. And so for this book particularly, I wanted to try to parallel Samara's fall into her addiction, like really plunging into her addiction at the same time as the supernatural is rising. And so, you know, not to sound weird, but, you know, I believe that there's spirits out there and they're trying to give us signs, and Samara is unwilling or unable at this moment to see them, but they're constantly being shown to her. And so, yeah, like this, it made me think back of, it's been a long time since I've had a drink, thank God, but it really did fuck my shit up. When I was thinking about what it feels like to be in that desperate situation of addiction, of reaching for something that you feel, this is going to save me. If I keep doing this, if I have the right combination of drink, if I wear the right clothes, if I do all these things, then this will save me. And the reality is that you have to stop and see, So yeah, it was hard for me to write about it. Obviously, if it messed up my dreams, I started talking in my sleep and stuff. But I don't know. I think that's good.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think it's kind of like opening a portal, right?
Yes.
Because there is this mythology around like drinking and art and artists, and
oh yes,
I definitely was a subscriber to that. Like, I needed like wine before I began like writing anything or to think about anything or do anything artistic, and then I would go back and read some of that shit. I was like, oh God. Oh, no. But stories are really powerful, and the stories we tell ourselves in particular, and then the stories we've internalized, that we've been told and we've internalized, such as the ones at Samara and Antonio and everyone. He has to be young, he has to keep up instead of staying true to his art and what how he presents and believing in that shining through. And Samara too, that there was something that she needed to run from, instead of trusting that people love her and that there's nothing that could ever make her unlovable or unworthy.
Right.
Right. And her grandmother being her sort of only connection to that.
Right. And then there's this thing of like the taking those steps, like following in those footsteps of her grandmother. Even though Samara takes this job and she thinks, oh, I'm gonna go forward, like I'm going surpassing what my grandmother, even my grandmother, my mother has done. I'm surpassing this. I'm going to, excel, and then to just sort of realize that history that her grandmother probably was telling her, she wasn't listening. She was blocking it out or drinking or, like the glittery is always, that gold is always so seductive until, it becomes a hook.
Absolutely. Yeah. What was my other question? Okay, so let me go back to this, because let's get down to business. You're taking on like some really hefty themes, right? So you told the LA Times, although the Vernon I write about in this book is purely fictional, factories have been poisoning brown communities for decades, while powerful men believe that their sexual predations are right. So we know that we see countless examples of capitalist colonialism at work. And just recently, during Hurricane Helene, Impact Plastics in Tennessee told their primarily Latina employees that if they left, they would lose their jobs. As a result, 11 were swept away by the floods. Of those, 2 perished that we know of, while 4 are still missing and presumed deceased. A company that produces one of the most harmful products ever created chose plastic over people. A lot of us have our roots as immigrants and, the children of immigrants in factory work. My father actually and my grandmother worked at the same plastics factory in New Jersey. And many of my family members did and worked there when they first arrived. I think like at the height of my father's career there, he made like $3 an hour. I just thought it was so relevant to point out, because what you're really telling us in this way, where the fashion industry we know is one of the biggest contributors to this, right? And the biggest exploiters of people, from where we derive our roots, from the global South. And but it's perceived as being the sort of ambassadors of beauty,
right,
and the arbiters of cool and what's fashionable. These are the people who tell us how we should look and how we should do our hair and makeup and all this. So how are you, or were you interested in interrogating this example of capitalist colonialism? Do you think it's possible for these novels to do that and, sort of like tease out these questions and leave us contemplating these like larger concepts? Because I think people get like stuck in the conceptual.
Right.
Yeah. And they don't
it's easy,
sort of understand.
It's easy for people to say, oh, this book is Devil Wears Prada, but, devil or something.
Right,
and
right,
that's
right,
like
right.
the easy sell, right?
Yeah,
like
totally,
you're just like,
totally.
I was like, well, no, not really. But okay, if you buy it, then that's on you. But like to me,
If you need it to be, sure.
if it needs to be, right. But when I read about that factory, and I was just like, it jolted me, because I was just like, oh my God, this is repeating. Like I there's something about like the history in a loop in this book that it feels very like that's the nightmare that we don't learn. Like it's just the corporations are just constantly trying to kill people. So, it was funny because I was, there was one point when I worked in Vernon and I worked for this fashion designer. And so nothing in here is really about that space or that designer, but there was all these beautiful seamstresses that were mostly brown, Latinas. And I was always like, I just wanted to hang out with them all day long. I just wanted to look at them work through the fabric, it was just like, I was like, these are the magicians. These are the, this is magic what they're performing. And they're, and I'll never forget that one of the execs there kind of gave that hint of like, a lot of them are undocumented, and it was always that threat always looming around. Yeah. And I was just like, even back then, because this was a long time ago, in the 2004 14 or 15 when I didn't even have a book deal yet, but I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a story.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't think it was going to be horror, but this is horrific. The way they treat them well, but they also like, but if you overstep,
Right.
like it's just this. So you see, I look at everything like I think of buildings and I think of clothes, and you're just like, who are the people who use their fingers to make that happen? You talk about factories. My father was just mentioning the lamp factory that he got his first job, and he was like, yeah, it was easy to get a job. I got a job for my father. I got him a job for my uncle. Like whoever was coming into Puerto Rico, I got them the job because it was at the lamp factory.
Yeah. Yeah, same.
And that was the entryway. And you're just like, it's such a fine line, I guess. It's just this idea of like, oh, thank God they found something, right?
Yeah.
A job.
Yeah.
But then also like, this is so fucked up.
It's super
Like you're just like, what poison, what, hazardous materials they're all working under, like what hurricane comes through and they don't allow them to leave. It's disturbing. And so then I love using horror or genre or speculative to be able to write about these horrific things and maybe amplify them a little bit more. But the story is entertaining and scary. It does what it's meant to do, but it's also always going to be about more than that.
That is evident. And you did a wonderful job there. And those are the sometimes we really want we're like desperate for an answer. And of course, this is meant to entertain, but it's also thought-provoking. It's very evocative. And the ending we have sort of the idea that there's justice here, right? But what like how do you imagine or how do you conceptualize like justice in this world? Or how would Samara conceptualize
to me,
justice
in this world is burning everything down,
right?
But
Starting over.
But it's also there's like really amazing specifically like in Los Angeles, there's like this community, like this bookstore community run is so revolutionary.
Yeah.
And there's this other place that we were talking about, my sister and I, about Sway, and they're doing like community dyeing and repurposing clothes, and this is in Los Angeles, and I'm like, oh, this is fascinating, and and it's not to say I buy into, I love clothes, Avi, but I love, say like there's art, there's artists out there, there's independent fashion designers that are really doing these beautiful works that, it's not just, I don't know, like there's people we could support, and we could also all thrift, like, thrift everything. Yeah. But I don't know, it's just like this thing of like, I love fashion, and then I also feel like what's justice? Justice is finding new ways of presenting this world, like this fashion world, or new ways of being in a job, that doesn't have to be tied to like you selling your soul to this 9 to 5, and it's never 9 to 5, is 9 to whenever, because now it's texting, and this is so bananas to me when someone said to me, like, I'm gonna text you work in the week. I was like, what the fuck? Like, I thought I clocked out. Like, I was just like, just because I'm available doesn't mean I'm available.
Yeah, I'm not available.
It's a really weird thing that's being done now, especially because we're so online, that your time isn't your time anymore.
Absolutely. And the idea of sort of being delusional about like this being a family. Like, I love that.
God.
About, she arrives as like your family now. I was like,
so many jobs where they're like, oh, we're gonna give you guys some perks, and it'll be like, a certificate to go get a massage or coffee, and you're just like, or bagels, and you're just like,
or drinks.
Oh yeah, that was really fun when I could do that.
Yeah, that was a big perk.
That was a big perk.
Yeah, but like in my research, like just to go through my family history, then finding out how much drugs and alcohol were used as a means to exploit labor and to make you feel like, ooh, this is such a perk, instead of sueldo, like instead of actual wages,
Right.
it's like, oh, I give you like this hovel to live in, and I give you like a couple bucks for food,
Right.
and here, get wasted, but you can only get wasted here at this canteen
Right.
like on this territory. And so, yeah, I'm understanding that for myself, and how closely those were connected. It was very liberating for me to understand that.
Well, this is the thing, is like that you spend so many hours working in a certain place, and then you do develop these really intense relationships with people.
Absolutely.
But it is that, guys, when the higher ups are, feeding you
Yeah.
these things that are like
Yeah.
perks.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm like, it's a scam, y'all.
It is. So I have one last bonus question, and then I think we can do like a Q&A. Is Angel the true designer of the Ramona? Yes or no?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I thought so. I was like,
You
"Ooh,
like, yeah,
Angel."
there was something more there.
There was something that he was insinuating.
I think everyone has secrets, and they don't wanna.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny.
There's a little insecurity in that.
It was
that
a big
memory.
insecurity, because
right?
Antonio has to surround himself with young people always, and that
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing, because if you surround yourself with young people, that's always a turnout of like people leaving all the time.
Yeah. It was almost like he was like, well, Angel was the true artist. And then maybe in his death, he kind of like, there's always that story of like someone dies and then you like steal their work because like they're dead. Yeah, yeah, exactly. What was it? That was Yellowface, right? Yeah. And I think that has been like around. That's often like a story. Like they're dead, so I can just take it. I'll take it from here. Okay. Well, thank you so much for this work, and thank you for bringing fashion into the conversation. Latinos are so a part of making clothes and creating trends, and but we're never in this conversation. So I was so happy to see this, and obviously I related so much. I'd love to take questions from the audience. Hello.
Okay, so for the both of you, as writers, there's, like you mentioned, often a lot of research that you have to do. Is there any research that didn't make it into this book that you were like, I'm gonna put this in my little folder, document later, that may come up that you really wanted to use?
I'm trying to think. I honestly didn't. The research there was a lot of like California fashion, and it was really fun to like do that research. And the Autry Museum in California has this amazing archives. If I were allowed, I would fall more into the fashion of describing everything, like just really the history of it. It would have been too boring, but I have to focus on the horror. But yeah, there wasn't anything that sort of like fell out that I discovered. I guess because with this book in particularly, I didn't have a first draft right away. I sold it as a proposal, and so then I had to write it afterwards. And I had an idea of what that was like, what it was gonna be like sort of like the memoir. Like you have to have a proposal, and this is the first book that I did that. So it was an interesting experiment, which is why I had to like. I sold them on what I told them I was gonna do, so I better do that instead of fucking around.
Yeah. That's very. My proposal looks so different than what my
came
book.
out
Yeah,
afterwards? That's interesting.
yeah. I felt very lucky. I was like, I don't think they remember. Let's just do this. Because like I definitely put in like the most salacious parts of my rock bottoming.
Oh, in there, and your book is you don't do the bottom.
No, I
but
didn't.
But it didn't need it.
No, it didn't. It
Yeah.
didn't. It was. I definitely wanted it to be a story of recovery, so I didn't want to be in the descent, I wanted to be in the ascension. And I wanted to do a history of the recovery movement for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I wanted it to be like historical nonfiction with like parts of my story in there. And everyone was kind of like, well, who the hell are you? Like, you're not a doctor, you're not a clinician, you're not like a researcher, you're like a girl, you're like a chick. in recovery. And I was like, oh, but the option there, the pathway there was to tell my story and thereby, gain some credibility and a readership and then move on to that. So that's always been my goal. And, maybe that was right. And so I did a ton of research. The part was to, keep it in my voice, because I did find that I was trying to I was reading a lot, and so I was trying to sound a certain way, and I wanted to perform. I was like, I don't have an MFA. I don't, I come from the non-traditional pathway, and so I did feel that pressure. But then I thought of what the purpose was for the book, and I did want to stay true to my voice.
No, I loved, I was really, honored to blurb it, but I was like, this is the book I would have want to read anyway. It wouldn't have mattered if you asked me to blurb. I would have been looking for it. But that's what I really liked, is that the research I learned so much about the recovery movement that I didn't know beforehand. And I was just like, it really, it was just really enlightening. And also just sort of I loved that it wasn't just the chronological thing of this is how I hit rock bottom and then I came up, to me it was really beautifully interspersed into stories.
And that's the way with Samara too. It was not it's just rock bottom, and that is never linear, and then the recovery is never linear. So it's very, even though it's a horror and it's fictionalized, like you said, our lives are pretty terrifying, especially when you're in a cycle like that.
Right.
So you don't have to go far, especially you having that experience, to write something that people can, they obviously know. Maybe they're not going to run into a meat hook on the corner. They're not going to be seeing pigs on the street, but they understand what you're hinting at. And we all have that sort of dread inside of us. So it's it's very, I don't know why I felt even comforted, because I think I have these sort of monsters, and the depiction of monsters makes the ones that I carry sort of less scary.
Oh yeah, I mean that's why I like writing horror, is because my own fears and my own, the world is crumbling around me while I'm going on book tour, and I'm just it's, if you look at the headlines, it's just I just start crying all the time.
Me too.
So to me, writing horror or speculative is just really my way of controlling the horror.
No, I relate to that. I might do that next time. Nonfiction is too hard. It's too real. So my little love letter to Samara was this moment in my book, and I'll just read. It's a quick paragraph, because I love that she was from Jersey. And my whole performance in life was being a New Yorker. My handle on Instagram is Nueva Yorka. I've been here for 20 years, so I think I earned it or whatever by the, the standards. But the truth is I'm a Jersey girl. So I wrote, I'm a Jersey girl. I'm from shorelines and turnpikes, bridges and tunnels. I'm from a place where they write songs about being born again and running away, but staying proud. Concentrated, a punch in a small package like John Bon, Bruce, or Snooki. Did you know she's Chilean? Did you know she quit drinking after she found alcohol in her breast milk? She's a cycle breaker, like me. Growing up, I had little appreciation for my first home. I thought of New York City as the promised land my parents imagined the United States would be when they were growing up in La Ceiba, Honduras, and Guayaquil, Ecuador. As they had, I believed that the unlucky place where we found ourselves at the start was temporary. Our true home was somewhere else. For me, it was across the Hudson River, a 1.5-mile drive through the Holland Tunnel. So that that makes me think you are a New York girl. You are a Nueva Yorka. But you live in Los Angeles now.
Yeah.
Was that like as we say in the rooms, was that a geographic, or did you always dream of being
Oh, no, that
Los
was a-
Angelina?
It was a geographic, and that's when
Yeah.
when I moved. That's when I really hit bottom because I didn't have my safety.
Yeah.
So my safety net was here in
Your
in
family.
New York. Yeah, everybody drinks together, and so when I moved to LA, I didn't have that, and so I really had to hit bottom. But it's funny because I remember one time someone had asked me in LA. They were like, "Oh, you're from New York?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm from New York." And she's like, "Oh, what part?" And she said, and I said Bronx, and she goes, "Oh." You know, like she was just like, "Oh, there's a hierarchy. If you're from New York, then you say you're from New York, or
Yeah.
whatever." And I was like, "This bitch, she's not even from New York." This is like rude. Anyway,
One time, I had been living in New York, I don't know how many years, and someone from my high school was like, "I'm going to Yankee Stadium. Do you know where I could park?" And I was like,
rude.
"Ma'am, first of all, what? Like, we have not, what is happening? Like, why would I know where you can park? I don't know." And that's like,
Amazing.
okay.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, but like that we so identify with a place, and that can be transformative, you know,
Yeah.
like is really interesting. But yeah, being so close to your family, like I probably would have gotten much more fucked up if I had been like not like this with my sister. I see you guys are very close.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's like, yeah. There's any other questions before I forget? We keep talking because
Yes,
we're having
Jared.
a conversation.
I was just thinking about all the women in the novel, and so like thinking about Rosa, thinking about Dolores, and wondering like how you conceive them in terms of like this community around Sumatra as well. I could have like followed any of them, their backstories, and I was like, oh, that's a long book. So I just wondering like how they came to you and how you put them all together.
I was, not to be obnoxious, but I was really thinking of the movie Three Women by Altman. And have you ever seen the movie? It's set in California, in like Joshua Tree, I think it is. And these three women, and they're not related in any way, but their lives sort of interchanges, or they become the other person, and it's almost mother, sister, daughter, and it's very trippy. It's a very trippy movie, but I'm obsessed with that movie, and my favorite is Shelley Duvall is in it. And I was thinking of that movie. I really wanted threes. Like I really wanted these women in this kind of repeating loop. And how do you break free from that loop? Even because we're all sisters, right? I know I say that all the time, but we're stuck in this space that it's all community or it's nothing. And so with these women, yeah, I really was thinking of the threes and was thinking of these generations. And yeah, I really wanted that to come up, and the horrors of it, how it plays off with all of them. So yeah, it's fun. Thanks, Jared, for the question.
I do have a question. We know that on this continent, the people who were here originally engaged with substances for ceremony, etc. We know that people who chose to invade brought substances to subjugate. And we know that historically that's happened numerous times in different waves. In El Salvador, for example, where my family's from, we know that the coffee plantations there, the British landowners who owned that finca looked to MIT because they would study to the minute. And at the turn of the century, they were studying like how much labor someone could do on how much ration of food and other methods of control, and in addition to alcohol. And we can see that even now with that being used as a method to control. We have young people working at jobs where, say it's a startup, and they have the after hour, or they have the bar at the, it's in the building.
Oh yeah.
And it seems casual, it seems like a perk, it seems like this cool thing, but really it's just another iteration of extending the workday.
Oh, yeah.
And I was wondering what advice either of you had for young people who are in these spaces, feel pressure to justify the sacrifices of their parents, but are drowning in imposter syndrome while also surrounded by temptation. And how to navigate that.
It's so funny when you were talking about the perks. That one job when I first moved to LA, that I remember, oh my God, they were rolling a keg past my cubicle. And I was just like, this is the best job ever. You know, like I was just like, look at this is great, you know? And I was just like, wow, this, you know, you look back, you're like, and they were all young people mostly, you know, working there and all these hours that you put in, startups, right? Man, I don't know my suggestion. It's interesting because I feel like there's been a change in what young people are willing to take. Like they're really pushing back. Like they're just like, I don't think so. Like, and it was just pretty amazing because I would never. I'd be like, do you want me to come in on Saturday too? Like it was just, I was willing to do whatever it took. And so I feel like a lot of young people aren't doing that. And I think that has its movement, the movement of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that has spread into like labor, like, you know, the labor movement is like historical, you know, but I think young people are really looking into that. You know, TikTok is revolutionary in a lot of ways. I'm not even on TikTok, but it's just like young people are out there just, you know, doing these videos and saying no. You know, it's a pretty amazing thing to be able to have that way of expressing yourself without being tied to, you know, dispelling that myth of like, oh, if you do it, if you work hard enough, you know, with our parents, you're like, you work until you retire. And my parents were like, you have another job? Like you like left that job and now you have another, and now I don't even, you know, work at a full-time gig anymore. But, you know, that's like, I'm sure that's like a scary thing for my parents who worked until they retired in the same fucking place, you know?
Yeah, I think I always feel like I'm not in a position to like give advice, and then I'm like constantly like giving advice. And, I think I sort of like naturally fall into like this Dia type role whenever I'm talking about this stuff. But like you, I'm very impressed, and I feel like I learn more from young people who have like a set of boundaries. Like when I was new in recovery, I remember someone speaking about boundaries and going up to that person and being like, hi, you spoke about boundaries. Like, how do I do that? Like how do I go about doing that? And they were like they couldn't explain it to me, you know, and that's a tough thing to explain to someone. First of all, because, you know, you have to understand what your boundary is. Like no one can really tell you how to, you know, construct that, or like, and I think they sort of come up in the moment, right? Like you start, it begins to occur to you that you're passing something, you're passing a point into some kind of self-betrayal. And that was just so easily swallowed constantly, like you said. And I was just with my sister, and we were talking about a friend that I worked with, and we would have, at a certain point in the day, we would break out the wine bottles, and we would do the rest of our work, and we would stay at work for like 2 more hours. And it was a finance firm, so we could like collect, you know, overtime or whatever, and be wasted. And that was totally fine. And just like walk out of there with like purple teeth, you know, doing these expense reports. But yeah, I think that what makes me excited about the future is that everyone is coming into a consciousness about this. And drinking is actually down, but other shit is way up. So we shouldn't be, you know, like, be heartened, sure, but it's not, the self-medicating is not going away. People are in deep grief and great dread. And I think for once, we're all like bracing for that moment where it's like, okay, that was over, and it's just not happening. It's not stopping. It's ramping up. And so we all kind of have that feeling like, all right, it's time to like, it's time to like suit up, you know, and like step up, and we're gonna have to, you know, be taking this work like, you know, to the streets, and we're all getting involved, and we're all sort of figuring out, yeah, there's no one coming to save us. We're being really realistic about our so-called governments, and we probably want to be awake for that.
Yeah. I always think about that. I mean, me being a speculative writer, I'm like, you know, if the zombies come out, you got to be aware. Like, you cannot be drunk or stoned.
Yeah.
If you got to run. So.
Yeah. Like sometimes it gets you to the next day.
Yeah.
But eventually you start to ask yourself, like, do I want to be in control of this, you know, next action, or, you know, or am I going to allow myself to sort of, you know, float for a bit or be swept up a little bit longer? But if you, like, when you get to the end and you see what happened to Samara, like, you know what I mean? Like, it took a lot for her to wake up. Like, we can, like, maybe.
Yeah, that girl needs to be shaken. Like, girl, wake up. You're in danger.
You're in danger, girl. Is she getting a part 2?
Oh, no.
Oh, no, she was.
The end.
Bye. But
Bye.
Jerry's proposition was really interesting, like taking one of the...
I know the
Like the
other
seamstresses
characters. I
or
know. I want to know what Dolores's
Definitely.
situation is. She's the main
Yeah.
seamstress there, and there's something about her that's really interesting that I didn't get to explore.
Yeah, and like even if like you went back in time with her,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. She's been with Antonio since the beginning, so she knows all the secrets.
Oh hell yeah! That was definitely the standout character for me, and I would love to know more about her. More questions? Anyone?
That's it. I think that's it. It's a wrap. It's a wrap, y'all.
It's a wrap.
Thank you so much for coming. Thanks
Thank
for
you so
reading.
much.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
conversation. Thanks, everyone.